In the heart of a peaceful California suburb, a nightmare unfolded behind closed doors. A man, once seen as a devoted husband and loving father, discovered a devastating truth. A DNA test revealed his 6-year-old daughter was fathered by his neighbor. This revelation shattered his world and unleashed a storm of anger and betrayal that would end in bloodshed. What could drive someone to commit such unthinkable acts against their own family? And how could a seemingly ordinary home become the site of such unimaginable violence? What was it about this betrayal that turned love into rage and trust into tragedy? Welcome to True Crime Acts, where we uncover the darkest and most shocking stories hidden within the folds of everyday life. In today's gripping episode, we look into the chilling case of a man whose world crumbled after a DNA test and the unimaginable violence that followed. Be sure to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss another deep look into the darkest corners of the human psyche. In the heart of a quiet California neighborhood, where life seemed to follow an unchanging rhythm of comfort and security, lived a family that outwardly appeared to embody the American dream. The father, a hard-working and devoted man, was known for his calm demeanor and dedication to his wife and daughter. The mother, warm and cheerful, was often seen tending to her garden or playing with their 6-year-old daughter in the yard. To neighbors, they were the picture of familial bliss, always polite, always smiling, and always together. Their daughter was a beacon of joy in the community, her infectious laughter echoing through the streets as she played with friends. She was adored by neighbors, who often remarked on her bright eyes and curious nature. The family seemed unshakable, a unit built on love and trust, shielded from the chaos of the outside world. But as is often the case with such idyllic facades, cracks were forming beneath the surface, cracks that would soon widen into a chasm of betrayal and violence. The father had always been proud of his role as a provider and protector. His world revolved around his family, and he took comfort in the routines that defined their lives. But as the years went by, small doubts began to creep into his mind. At first, they were fleeting thoughts, easy to dismiss. A comment from a friend about the daughter's appearance or an offhand remark from his wife would linger in his mind longer than it should. He tried to push these thoughts aside, convincing himself that they were baseless and fueled by insecurity. But as time went on, the doubts became harder to ignore. He began to notice little things, mannerisms in his daughter that didn't resemble his own, features that seemed strikingly different. He tried to suppress these feelings, afraid of what they might mean. Yet the more he tried to ignore them, the louder they became, like a drumbeat in his mind that refused to stop. The relationship between the family and their neighbor had always been cordial, even friendly. The neighbor was a familiar face in their lives, often seen chatting casually with the wife or playing with the children in the yard. He was someone the father had trusted, someone who had shared meals at their table and been welcomed into their home. But as the father's suspicions grew, his interactions with the neighbor took on a different tone. Every smile, every laugh, every shared moment between the neighbor and his wife now felt tainted, like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite assemble. Determined to put his mind at ease, the father decided to take action. What began as quiet doubts had grown into an obsession, a need to uncover the truth at any cost. He ordered a DNA test, hoping that the results would dispel his fears and restore his faith in his family. He didn't tell his wife about the test, fearing her reaction and wanting to confirm his suspicions privately. The weeks leading up to the arrival of the test results were torturous. The father tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, but the weight of his uncertainty hung heavy over the household. His wife noticed his mood shifts, his growing irritability, but he brushed off her concerns with vague excuses about work stress. The daughter, oblivious to the tension brewing around her, continued to fill the house with laughter and light, unaware of the storm about to descend. The day the DNA test results arrived marked the beginning of the end. The father sat alone at the dining table, staring at the envelope as if it held the power to destroy his entire world. He hesitated, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. Finally, he opened it, his hands shaking as he unfolded the document. The words leaped off the page, 0% probability of paternity. At that moment, the perfect facade shattered. The doubts that had plagued him for years were now confirmed, and the betrayal he had feared was real. But the truth didn't bring relief or closure. It brought anger, humiliation, and a sense of loss so profound it consumed him. His wife's deception wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a betrayal of identity, a cruel joke that had stolen years of his life. And the neighbor, he wasn't just an accomplice in this betrayal. He had become the embodiment of everything the father despised. What happens when the foundation of your life is ripped away in an instant? How far would you go to reclaim control, to make sense of the chaos that has consumed you? The truth he had uncovered was a double-edged sword. It gave him answers, but shattered his life in ways he couldn't have anticipated. The DNA test results not only confirmed his worst fears, but revealed an even deeper betrayal. The father of his 6-year-old daughter wasn't a stranger. It was their neighbor, a man who had been a fixture in their lives, a so-called friend. The realization hit him like a tidal wave, drowning him in a torrent of emotions. Anger burned hottest, but beneath it was a deep sense of humiliation. He thought back to the years he had spent raising a child who wasn't biologically his, pouring his love and resources into a life built on lies. Every bedtime story, every birthday party, every sacrifice he had made, it all felt like a cruel joke now. But the betrayal didn't stop there. The neighbor, who had shared meals at their table, who had joked with him and played with his daughter, was now revealed as a silent interloper in his life. The trust he had placed in this man had been exploited in the worst way imaginable. The father's mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Did everyone know but him? Was he the last to see the truth that was so glaringly obvious now? Unable to contain his growing resentment, the father confronted his wife. The argument erupted like a volcanic explosion, years of hidden tensions boiling over in an instant. He demanded answers, his voice shaking with rage. The wife, caught off guard, tried to deflect, but the father wasn't interested in excuses. He wanted the truth, raw and unfiltered, no matter how much it hurt. Finally, she confessed. Yes, she had an affair. Yes, it had been with the neighbor. And yes, she had known all along that their daughter wasn't biologically his. Her voice trembled as she admitted to the years of guilt she had carried, but her words only fueled his anger. To him, her guilt was meaningless, a feeble attempt to justify the pain she had inflicted on him. For days, the father avoided both his wife and the neighbor, unable to face either of them without feeling the rage bubbling just beneath the surface. He buried himself in his thoughts, replaying the betrayal over and over, each time growing angrier. He thought about the laughter they had shared, the trust he had placed in them. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt, it was the humiliation of being made a fool. As the days turned into weeks, the father became consumed by his emotions. His once rational mind was now clouded by thoughts of revenge. He began to fantasize about confronting the neighbor, imagining every possible scenario, from shouting matches to physical altercations. He rehearsed his words in his head, preparing to unleash the storm that had been brewing inside him. But with each passing day, his anger became more than just a desire for confrontation. It transformed into something darker, more dangerous. The father began to fixate on the idea that he could never truly move on until he had taken control of the situation, until he had made both his wife and the neighbor pay for what they had done. What happens when betrayal pushes someone to the brink? At what point does the desire for justice turn into a thirst for vengeance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. How would you handle a betrayal of this magnitude? The revelation of the DNA test shattered the fragile illusion of trust that once held the family together. Every glance, every memory, and every conversation with his wife or neighbor replayed in the father's mind like a film reel, each moment now tainted with suspicion and humiliation. He couldn't escape the haunting thought that their betrayal wasn't just a mistake, but a deliberate act of deceit. Unable to suppress his anger any longer, the father began confronting his wife more frequently. Each conversation spiraled into arguments, their words cutting deeper with every exchange. The wife's tearful apologies and attempts to explain did little to ease his growing resentment. To him, her words were hollow, mere attempts to salvage what she had destroyed. The tension reached a boiling point when the father could no longer ignore the neighbor's presence. What once was a casual wave or friendly nod now felt like a taunt. Every time he saw the neighbor, a storm of emotions brewed inside him: rage, humiliation, and an unrelenting desire for retribution. The neighbor, seemingly unaware of the storm brewing, continued to go about his life as usual. This perceived indifference only fueled the father's fury. How could this man who had betrayed him so deeply act as though nothing had happened? The father began to feel trapped, a prisoner of his own spiraling thoughts and emotions. Do you think the father's growing anger could have been diffused with support from someone he trusted? What would you have done if faced with such a betrayal? The days following the DNA revelation became unbearable. The father's anger, once a simmering undercurrent, now boiled over into a relentless obsession. He began tracking the neighbor's movements, watching him leave for work, return home, and interact with others in the neighborhood. Every mundane action seemed like an insult, a reminder of the betrayal that had turned his world upside down. At home, the arguments with his wife intensified. Their once loving relationship had disintegrated into a battlefield of accusations and resentment. The daughter, caught in the crossfire, became a silent witness to the growing tension. Her once vibrant laughter was replaced by quiet fear as she tried to navigate the fractured world around her. One evening, after another heated argument, the father stormed out of the house. He drove aimlessly for hours, his thoughts consumed by the betrayal and the overwhelming need to reclaim some semblance of control. When he finally returned, something in him had shifted. The calm exterior he wore to mask his pain was gone, replaced by a cold determination. It was then that the breaking point was reached. The father's simmering anger gave way to a dangerous resolve. He could no longer see a way forward without taking drastic action. The betrayal in his mind demanded a reckoning. Do you believe there were moments where intervention could have changed the outcome? The night that would forever change the lives of everyone involved began like any other. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the television in the background. But beneath the surface, tensions were bubbling dangerously close to the surface. The father, now consumed by his anger and betrayal, could no longer contain the storm brewing inside him. That evening, another argument erupted between the father and his wife. Unlike their previous fights, this one was laced with an intensity that seemed almost impossible to control. Every word exchanged felt like a weapon, cutting deeper and deeper. The wife pleaded for forgiveness, for understanding, but her words fell on deaf ears. To the father, her betrayal was unforgivable, and her attempts at reconciliation only added fuel to the fire. As the argument escalated, the daughter appeared in the doorway, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. Her innocent eyes darted between her parents, her small voice trembling as she asked them to stop fighting. But her plea went unheard. The father, blinded by his emotions, could no longer see reason or the fear in his daughter's eyes. In a sudden and horrifying turn, the father's rage reached its peak. What followed was an explosion of violence that would leave the house soaked in silence and tragedy. In his fury, he lashed out at his wife with unimaginable brutality. Her cries echoed through the house, but no one came to her aid. And when his rage turned to their daughter, the outcome was even more devastating. By the time the neighbors called the police, the damage had already been done. The once loving home had become a scene of unimaginable horror. When officers arrived, they found the wife and daughter lifeless, their lives stolen in a moment of unthinkable rage. The father sat on the floor, blood on his hands, staring blankly at the wall, as if the enormity of his actions had yet to sink in. What pushes someone to such a breaking point? Could there have been signs that this tragedy was imminent? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. In the days following the murders, the quiet suburban neighborhood was plunged into shock and grief. Neighbors, who had once admired the family, now struggled to reconcile the horrific events that had unfolded just beyond their picket fences. How had such a tragedy gone unnoticed until it was too late? They seemed so happy. I never thought something like this could happen so close to home. The media quickly descended on the scene, turning the tragedy into a national spectacle. Headlines screamed of betrayal, rage, and unthinkable violence, painting the father as a monster, consumed by his emotions. But for those who knew the family, the story was far more complex. It wasn't just about a man snapping. It was about the slow unraveling of trust, love, and humanity under the weight of betrayal. As the investigation continued, more details emerged about the father's state of mind in the weeks leading up to the murders. Friends and coworkers described him as withdrawn and agitated, a man consumed by something he couldn't talk about. Some wondered if they should have seen the warning signs, if they could have intervened before it was too late. Could intervention have stopped this tragedy? The father's arrest marked the beginning of a long and harrowing journey toward justice. As officers secured the crime scene, forensic teams worked methodically to piece together the events of that fateful night. The evidence told a chilling story: overturned furniture, blood splattered across walls, and the shattered remnants of a once loving home. During his initial interrogation, the father's demeanor was eerily calm. He admitted to the murders but showed little remorse, describing the events as the inevitable outcome of his wife's betrayal. Detectives, hardened by years of experience, were taken aback by his detached tone. It was as if he had justified his actions in his mind, framing himself as the true victim of the story. The trial that followed captivated the nation. Prosecutors painted a grim picture of a man consumed by jealousy and rage who allowed his emotions to spiral into violence. They presented the DNA test results as the catalyst for his actions, but they also emphasized the calculated nature of the crime. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a deliberate act of revenge. The defense, on the other hand, argued that the father's actions were the result of extreme emotional distress. They portrayed him as a man pushed to his breaking point by a betrayal that had shattered his identity as a husband and father. While the argument garnered some sympathy, it wasn't enough to outweigh the brutal evidence of his crimes. Witness testimonies added another layer of complexity to the trial. Friends and coworkers described the father as a quiet and devoted family man, making the violence even harder to comprehend. Meanwhile, neighbors spoke of overhearing arguments in the weeks leading up to the murders, though none had imagined the situation would escalate to such a horrifying extent. In the end, the jury found the father guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would never walk free again. The verdict brought a measure of closure to the victim's grieving family members, but it also left them grappling with the unanswerable question: why? Do you think the father's emotional turmoil could ever excuse his actions, or was justice served with his sentence? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The murders left an indelible mark on the community, a peaceful suburb now haunted by the memory of what had unfolded within its borders. Neighbors who once exchanged friendly waves with the family now struggled to come to terms with the tragedy. How could such violence happen in a place that felt so safe? Schools and local organizations held vigils for the victims, honoring the lives of the wife and daughter, while calling attention to the importance of mental health and conflict resolution. The tragedy became a sobering reminder that even the most idyllic communities are not immune to the darkest aspects of human behavior. The community also grappled with feelings of guilt. Many wondered if they could have done more to intervene. Some neighbors recalled overhearing arguments or noticing the father's increasingly erratic behavior, but dismissed it as a private matter. Now they couldn't help but ask themselves, could they have prevented this tragedy by speaking up? The tragedy left a scar on the community, but it also sparked crucial conversations about the warning signs of violence, the impact of betrayal, and the devastating consequences of unchecked emotions. What began as a personal betrayal between husband and wife ended in an unimaginable loss, not just for the family, but for everyone who knew them. The case served as a harsh reminder that even the strongest bonds can break under the strain of deception and unaddressed emotional turmoil. Experts weighed in on the psychological impact of betrayal, emphasizing the importance of seeking help before anger and pain spiral into something dangerous. The father's descent into violence didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual unraveling of trust, compounded by isolation and unspoken emotions. The community began taking steps to learn from the tragedy. Local organizations hosted workshops on mental health, conflict resolution, and recognizing the signs of domestic violence. Neighbors who once kept to themselves started building stronger connections, ensuring that no one felt isolated or unheard. The tragedy also reignited debates about privacy and intervention. Many neighbors admitted to overhearing arguments or noticing the father's growing tension, but hesitated to step in. Some feared overstepping boundaries, while others assumed the situation would resolve itself. Now, they questioned whether speaking up could have made a difference. What would you have done if you were in their shoes? Should communities be more proactive in addressing signs of trouble, or is it a fine line between helping and intruding? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The story of this family is not just a tragedy, it's a wake-up call. It's a reminder of the devastating impact that betrayal, anger, and unresolved emotions can have when left unchecked. But it's also an opportunity to learn, to reflect, and to make changes that could save lives in the future. At True Crime Acts, we believe in not just telling these stories, but encouraging meaningful discussions about how we can prevent similar tragedies. What signs would you look for in your own community? How can we foster an environment where people feel supported before they reach a breaking point? We want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective could make all the difference. And if this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to stay connected as we continue uncovering the truths behind humanity's darkest moments.